Hello, welcome to today's ALCTS Webinar, Sudden Systems Librarian. I'm Felicity Dykes, a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee. I will be your host for today's webinar. We rescheduled this webinar from an October date, so I want to say thank you for being flexible with our schedule change. And we're glad we're having it today. Our presenter is Glenn Bunton. Glenn is Director of Library Technology Services at the University of South Carolina. He began his career as a reference librarian, search analyst at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, and has held other various positions along the way. So you can see he has experience in this topic and a lot to share with us. There are a few things to keep in mind for today's webinar. All attendees are muted. So if you have a question for Glenn, please type it into the question box on your screen, and Glenn will answer the questions at the end of the presentation. We don't have interactive chat capabilities, so if you wish to use Twitter to comment on today's presentation, there's a hashtag here that you can use. We're not monitoring that Twitter feed, so please do use the question box to submit questions and comments. This webinar is being recorded. You'll receive an email with links to the recording and presentation slides within 2 days. And now here's Glenn. There'll be a slight delay as we change presenters.
Thank you, Felicity, and thank you to ALCTS for the opportunity to visit with all of you. And finally, thanks to all of you for your interest. As Felicity mentioned, the title of this is the Sudden Systems Librarian. Now, sudden, as we all know in academia, may be a misnomer because nothing happens in academia suddenly. But what we are talking about here is, in essence, the fact that very few of us ever came into our profession anticipating being a systems librarian. So we could call it the accidental systems librarian, or the unplanned or unexpected systems librarian. And in fact, let's take a quick poll just as we get started to find out where you are as an audience in your current responsibilities. So we're going to post a poll that essentially is going to ask you, where are your current responsibilities? Have you been a systems librarian for a little while, say over a year? Are you just starting in that role? Are you actually working in a technical services area but seem to have some systems responsibilities? Or are you in a public services area and have some systems responsibilities? So if we could, let's go ahead and take a look at that poll quickly and see where we're all coming from. I see everybody is answering quickly, which is great. We're up to 87%, and the results, I think, are interesting. My one surprise is, so nobody in the audience has been a systems librarian for more than a year. Good to know. You're probably not unusual. There are lots of people in lots of academic libraries who have just come into these spots. Hopefully this webinar will help you out with some of that. There's a variety of information out there about systems librarianship. There, in fact, is a book titled The Accidental Systems Librarian. ALA provides LIDA guides on top technologies every librarian needs to know. A wide range of information about technology and librarians. I mention this only to say that obviously in the next 45 minutes we're not going to be able to cover everything there is to being a systems librarian. I'm not sure if we had a week we could cover everything there is to being a systems librarian. So don't worry about that. What I do hope we can accomplish in the webinar is to provide sort of a foundation of where systems librarians come from, what they do, areas that they are responsible for. we'll discuss some areas that likely will be new to you along the way, some areas of knowledge, some skill sets that you'll develop as you take on more responsibilities and step into that role. Obviously not everything, just some examples. And if anything comes from this, if you take nothing else, I hope you will walk away from this feeling some comfort that you can do this, that however you came into the role, you will be able to accomplish this and be successful at being a systems librarian. So how did I get here? Very quickly. I list these various positions that I've held not to suggest that I can't hold a job, but more to make a couple of observations. As you will see, I never started out thinking I was going to be a librarian, and I don't think that has changed since I was in library school. That's very common. Our profession is predominantly a second profession situation for most of us. So we never even anticipated being in libraries. And then, secondly, you'll notice I don't have any sort of official computer science experience. And if you saw my resume, I don't have any computer science educational background. I've sat in on some computer science classes since I've been a professional, but my background is not computer science. It's not even technology. It's teaching, education, and social sciences. And finally, my primary library experience was as a reference librarian. Again, not completely uncommon, but again, I mentioned this to say very few systems librarians that I know have a background that you would have anticipated them being systems librarians. Therefore, if you don't have that background, don't worry about it. You're like the rest of us, and you will easily be as successful as we have been because you have some interest and some abilities. So how, in fact, did you get where you are? Historically, systems librarians came from technical services or access services positions. If you think about it and think about the history of libraries, this sort of makes sense because, in fact, the first system that developed in libraries was the integrated library system, although at its earliest stage, it's a misnomer to even call it that. Basically, it was a materials management system, cataloging of stuff, and then a circulation system, tracking where stuff went and who had stuff, and then later an OPAC, an online public access catalog, ways to find stuff in the system. And so it made sense that the people who worked most closely with that system evolved into systems librarians. As libraries expanded behind the ILS and the user experience concept became more significant, the web became more significant, we began to see more public service background librarians evolve into systems roles. Oftentimes these came from people who had experience working with the web, developing web pages, developing websites, that type of thing. And so the assumption was, oh, well, they know how to do that. They can be a systems librarian, even if those two activities are very, very different. Recently, we've seen in some circumstances non-library technology people take on the role of systems librarian. As systems become more sophisticated, more complex, the skill sets are perceived to be more complex and sophisticated, and so it becomes more difficult to find people with those skill sets, and in some cases you find them in technology background people who have no background in libraries. There, I would suggest, are issues with that, but I understand how that comes from. So another quick poll. If you would, go ahead and let us know what would you consider to be your primary library background experience? Technical services, access services, public services, or non-library technology? And we'll see if the results here turn out to be the expected. We're about 85, so we're almost there, and we're seeing what I would have guessed, that predominantly technical services background, secondarily public services background, some access services, and a small non-library technology background. Again, a very common breakdown. So what do you take from that? You can evolve into a systems role from pretty much anywhere within the library and sometimes even outside the library. Okay, so what are we talking about when we talk about a systems librarian? I mentioned the book, The Accidental Systems Librarian. You can check it out if you like. It's got some interesting things and some valuable information in it. Here are a couple of quotes that are offered in it. The first one in particular is one that I find pretty right on the spot, because I do believe, as it says, the systems librarian is a unique breed. To be an effective systems librarian takes an interesting combination of skills and abilities, some of which seem at times to be contradictory. But in this case, the position requires someone who not only understands libraries and computers, but someone who can put both fields into context. An effective systems librarian is more than just somebody who knows how to make the machines run. And an effective systems librarian is someone who knows more and has more ability than knowing just how libraries work. But someone who can tie those two things together, look at systems and technology, and perceive ways that it can benefit what is the ultimate outcome that we're looking for, service to our users. If I had any qualms about either of these statements, it would be that in neither case do you see the concept or the word service in there. And I am a personal strong believer that libraries and technology, the ultimate outcome is service to the user. It's not predominantly about the stuff. It's not predominantly about the technology. It's what the combination of the two can bring to the user to make the user's experience better, more effective, more successful. Now, when we're talking about systems librarian, we're talking about library systems. And what are we talking about there? On the screen, you will see some examples of common systems that are found in libraries. Depending on your situation and your organization, you may have all of these, you may have some of these, you may have one of these. As I mentioned, the integrated library system has historically been the predominant system that libraries use. But obviously, most libraries have a web presence that sometimes can come from the integrated library system, but often is a separate web server that is running. And so as a systems librarian, you become responsible for that in some way, shape, or form. If you're in an academic library, chances are you're dealing with remote users. Even if you're in a public library anymore, you're dealing with remote users. And so you have systems and products that are involved in allowing remote access to licensed materials. Again, document delivery is a fundamental service, certainly of academic libraries. That may be part of your integrated library system. That may be a separate system altogether. And then, depending again on your situation, you may be involved with digital repositories of one kind or another. You may be creating digital content and putting them into a particular system. You may be storing or managing scholarly communications on your campus that may be going into some kind of digital repository system. Variety of different systems, variety of different purposes. Again, you may have some of these, you may have one of these, you may have all of these, you may have more. What the ultimate conclusion is your role as systems librarian can be fairly complicated and fairly exciting. So, one of the things that the book Accidental Systems Librarian did was the authors did a survey, and among the questions they asked people, so what are the titles that cover your job? And here's just a subset of the list they came out with. I offer these, again, simply to convey that when we use the term systems librarian, it can mean a variety of different things to a variety of different people in a variety of different circumstances. You can probably look through these titles and you may have one. You may have somebody else on your staff that has one. You may look at the titles and go, well, that's not my title, but that's part of what I do. And so what you want to realize, what I want to convey here is if you are stepping into the role of systems librarian, if you are new to it, if you are thinking about pursuing it, one of the things you need to clarify with wherever you're at is, what does that mean? What does that entail? What am I responsible for? Am I responsible for everything? Am I responsible for some things? I will make a brief side comment that the last item on the list, the tech person, is one that I threw in. And the reason why I throw that in is because in my experience personally and in my experience knowing other technology and systems librarians, something that happens not infrequently is you develop some set of skills, some set of knowledge that is more than everybody else, and you immediately become the expert. Now, you know you're not the expert, but because you know something a little bit more than they do, they perceive you in that way. And technology in particular seems to follow that pattern. If you know a little bit of technology, but it's more than everybody else knows, you become the tech person. And the assumption is you know everything about technology. That's one way that systems librarians find their way into that role or asked to take on that role. It's a cool way to get there. Again, you know the truth, but you don't have to let everybody else know. Just go with it. So those of you who are Doctor Who fans will probably recognize that this is a picture of the TARDIS, and it's the vehicle that the Doctor floats through space and time. And if you are a Doctor Who fan, you will know that sort of the catchphrase of the TARDIS is that when any new character steps foot inside the TARDIS, the first thing they exclaim is, it's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. Well, systems librarianship is sort of like that. Systems librarian as a title can seem to convey a very discrete, very defined, sort of limited arena. But anybody who is in that role knows can be a very expansive role. And that's a great thing. One of the things that I love about what I do when I was a systems librarian and just working with technology and libraries throughout my career is it truly is, there's always something new. There's always something new to learn. There's always something new to explore. There's always something new to try. And for someone like me who gets bored easily, that's a wonderful thing. And so in terms of what systems librarians do, It's not a job that you do the same thing every day. You're going to do some things regularly, but chances are every day is going to be a little different. Every week is going to be a little different. And for personalities that like that type of thing, it makes coming to work great because you're looking forward to what the day holds. Again, these are some items that came from the survey that was done in the book in terms of what the people holding systems librarian positions do. And one of the things, and I've just, again, selected some of the entire list just to show you some of the variety. I have deliberately sort of broken out into two categories. It's not listed like that on the survey. But what I've done is listed the top, the top 5. I would suggest that any systems librarian in any circumstance is probably going to do most, if not all, of those things to some degree. Obviously, administer the integrated library system. The ILS is still the fundamental system in libraries, and you as a systems librarian are going to be responsible for it. We'll talk in a minute about what that actually means. You will, if you have other library systems, some of the ones that we looked at previously, you're probably going to be responsible for administering those. Not absolutely true. There are academic libraries, wonderful academic libraries with gigantic technology staffs that are able to have a single person for each system. Would that that were so. Most of us probably don't have that experience, and in all likelihood, if you are finding yourself in the sort of sudden systems librarian role, you definitely don't have that. You have one person, probably you, that's going to administer any and all of the systems that the library is dependent upon. You're going to provide information and training to library staff. Now, you may have already done some of that in your previous positions. So let's say you were in cataloging. You were a department head, you were a cataloger, or whatever, metadata expert in your organization. You may already be providing information and training on how to use one aspect of the integrated library system or one aspect of other systems that you might have in your library. The information and training that you're going to provide as a systems librarian is going to be different and going to come from sort of a different direction. Whereas you may have been involved in sort of end user training of a system here and providing information about the end user experience. As a system librarian, you're going to be sort of moving from back end out regarding the system and how it works and things that your library staff need to know to make it work effectively. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple minutes in terms of how the perspective changes. The second set of things are activities that you may or may not be responsible as a systems librarian, again, depending on your organizational circumstance and situation. You may or may not be responsible for computer hardware and software selection, installation, and troubleshooting. If your organization or institution is small and you have stepped into the systems librarian / tech overseer, then chances are you're going to be involved with that activity. The web presence, leadership, oversight, and maintenance. In some circumstances, as a systems librarian, you may simply be responsible for making sure that the web server is running, and there may be somebody else who is responsible for oversight of the content of the website. But depending on your circumstance, you may also be that person. You may be involved with software development or database development. Depends on your organization, how you approach those two things, what resources you have available to you. Digitization activities. You may have some of that, you may have all of that, you may have none of that. Again, that's a situation where, as the systems librarian, you may simply be responsible for making sure that the digital management system is running, and there are other people with responsibilities for actually doing the sort of digital content creation and management. Or you may be that person as well. I'll jump to electronic resource management very quickly. Chances are, as a systems librarian, you're not going to do that. That's going to be coming from, if you have an electronic resources librarian or someone in your technical services or acquisitions or that type of thing. But you may have some involvement with those activities. The one item that I skipped over, I debated because arguably it perhaps should go in the top, and that is network administration and security. And we'll talk about this more in just a second. But this is an area where you will become very cognizant very quickly. Your system is connected to the campus network, and because of that, there is some involvement with network administration and security. So those are just some examples of things. There's tons of other things that may fall into your lap as systems librarian, dependent totally on your organizational situation. So we sort of have a sense of what we think a systems librarian is, what they're called, and the variation of how people might think about them, what they do, sort of in general terms. You're stepping into that role. And as I noticed in the first poll, there apparently in the audience, none of you have been a systems librarian for more than a year. So for most of you, either you've stepped into the role and it's new, or you are doing some of the activities of systems librarianship, but it's not your fundamental role, which means you're stepping into some new areas. So for just a couple of minutes, hopefully I can mention some things that you will be able to expect and you will anticipate developing. The first is, and I went back and forth of how to organize these things, and I'm not really sure, but it seems to me that one of the things that you will notice over time, and so I mention it at the outset because you probably won't see it at the outset, is your perspective is going to change and is going to need to change, as we talked about just a minute ago. If you're in cataloging, if you're in circulation, if you're in reference, whatever, and if we look just at the integrated library system as one example, your experience and awareness of that system is focused on the application that is specific to your responsibilities. If you're in cataloging, you're focused on the cataloging module. If you're in circulation, the circulation module. If you're in reference, probably the public access interface in some way, shape, or form. When you step into the role of systems librarian, your perspective sort of has to flip. And now, instead of being focused first on the particular applications and sort of situational functions of any system, you're going to be starting at the operating system level and moving out. You're going to have responsibilities for a broad perspective of the entirety of the system. So while you certainly will continue to need expertise and knowledge about any particular function of a system, your primary responsibility is to make sure the whole thing works. That starts with what operating system is it running on? Is it a Windows system? Is it a Linux or Unix system? Is it a Mac, Apple system? And how that interacts and interplays with the system itself. That's going to be a very different perspective for most people stepping into the role. You never had to think about that previously. Now you will. Along those same lines, your perspective is going to change from a local to a global one. You are now going to have to think about what does the whole system do? How do we make the whole system work most effectively? How does this system work in relation to another system? How do the library systems work in relation to the campus network environment, so on and so forth? Again, in your previous experience, chances are you were focused locally. My workstation, my responsibilities for my particular job, and you really didn't give much thought to the broader picture. As a systems librarian, you're going to be expected to think in those terms and become aware of how all of those things work together. In terms of knowledge and skills, depending on your background, there are probably going to be tons of them, and there are lists and lists that you can find. Don't be overwhelmed by all of that. It's sort of, if you sit down and you list everything that ideally you would like to know about any particular job, not just systems librarian, it would be a list a mile long and would probably be pretty intimidating. Chances are, in whatever role you currently have or had previous to being systems librarian, there's a gigantic list of that you don't think about knowing, but you do. So obviously you can learn and develop the same knowledge and skills for systems librarian. Let me make one personal comment here. You'll notice I put SAKI there. Chances are you're familiar with the reference to KSA in human resources. That stands for knowledge, skills, and abilities, and that oftentimes is what's applied to job descriptions and, you know, what's needed for this particular job. And I've always found that to be missing one aspect that particularly in my world is fundamental, and that is interest. So I just sort of changed it around to be skills, abilities, knowledge, and interest. You can have all the knowledge, skills, and abilities you want, but again, as I mentioned previously, particularly in the technology world where it really is true that everything is constant, there's always something new. A person who doesn't have the interest and the curiosity to be looking for that is going to be challenged. And so to me, that is equal to the other three. Now, very quickly, because I don't want to run out of time, I want to leave enough time for some questions that maybe I can answer at the end. But let me just mention a couple of knowledge skill areas that, depending on where you are coming from into this role, you may not have familiar with, that at the outset I would encourage you to get some familiarity with. Again, I emphasize the word familiarity. Don't even worry about expertise. Expertise comes with time and experience. Whatever expertise I have, I always tell my staff this, comes because I failed 1,000 times doing things in the previous roles that I've had. So that's okay. That's the way it works, particularly in technology. So the first one is Linux, Unix. Again, if you are, you know, coming from public services, technical services, whatever, if you're not coming from a technology background, then chances are the majority of your experience has been whatever your desktop is and the applications that you used on that desktop. In most cases, it's probably Windows. In some cases, it might be Mac. But the focus has been on the application, not the operating system. In the systems world, no doubt there are Windows servers and systems that run on Windows. There are the same that run on Mac. But Linux and Unix is sort of a foundational operating system in the systems world. So the more that you begin to learn what that means, what it is, how it works, the better off you're going to be as a systems librarian. When it comes to troubleshooting a system, you're going to have to work and explore both the product itself as well as the operating system that it is sitting on. And in many cases, particularly if we're talking open source products, which I'll mention in a second, chances are that's going to be Linux Unix. What's wonderful is there's a huge community of Linux users out there who are more than ready to assist with any question you might have. The second area is scripting. And basically scripting, think of as programming simplified. So one of the things that you're probably going to want to explore at the outset, again, just to get a familiarity with, are scripting languages like PHP, which stands for Pre-Hypertext Processing, for what that's worth. It's a very common scripting language that, again, an awful lot of open source software uses. Previous times, there's a programming or a scripting language called Perl that you may want to become familiar with. One of the reasons why you want to be familiar with this, with scripting, is it will allow you to do automate some things relative to the systems that you're managing. There may be times, for example, with the integrated library system, where the system itself doesn't offer you to do what you want to do with the data that is in the system. But if you can create and develop some scripts that can automate pulling out some of that data, manipulating some of that data, repurposing some of that data, that type of thing. Again, don't be overwhelmed when you go looking at these kinds of things. There's lots of online resources to learn. There's lots of communities to learn. Take it one step at a time. But those two in particular, I would go ahead, if you're just stepping in, to go ahead and become familiar with some of those. In terms of new knowledge and terminology, obviously lots of the terminology may not be phrases or words that you've used in the past. Don't worry about it. You'll pick it up. Just, Lord knows we work in libraries where anybody walking in who isn't a librarian doesn't know what we're talking about half the time. We didn't either when we started. Now it's just second nature and we don't even think about it. This will be the same. But a couple of items, areas which are sort of terminology and knowledge areas that I would encourage you to develop fairly quickly. As we mentioned earlier, network infrastructure. Be aware your systems are connected to the campus network. One of the activities that you as a systems librarian are going to be responsible for, and I forgot to mention it on the slide earlier, is you're going to be the communication liaison to technology entities. You're going to be the communication liaison probably to vendors of your systems. More importantly, chances are high you're going to be the communication liaison to the other technology entities on campus. If nothing else, you're going to need to know what they're talking about. You may not need to understand it completely, but you will need to know what the words are, particularly when it comes to discussing infrastructure, network infrastructure and network issues. Cat5 versus Cat6 cables, routers, switches, splitters, that type, access points for wireless, that type of thing. Those are terms, those are concepts that you're going to want to develop, and over time you'll become more expert in exactly what's involved. But at the outset, you're simply going to want to be able to get to a level where you can understand what your campus people are talking about, so you know what issues they're bringing up. Network security and firewalls. Understanding more fully what a firewall actually does. In previous experience, your primary security issues were virus detection on your desktop. Well, now when you're running systems, you're talking about ports that are open and closed and connections inside the campus versus outside the campus and all of those types of things. Authorization and authentication. You're going to want to learn the difference between those two and why that's important. Acronyms, you know, we in the library have plenty. As a systems librarian, you're going to have plenty. Just a couple of examples: CMS, Content Management System; LMS, Learning Management System; DMS, Digital Management System. Again, those acronyms are going to be thrown around. You're going to want to know what they mean, what they're referring to. And I mentioned tiered storage. That may not be applicable to a lot of you, but the idea of storage of digital content at whatever level becomes very significant to you as a systems librarian. As a technical service person or a public services person or an access services person in the library, all you cared probably about was how much you can store on your local hard drive and is there someplace else that you can save stuff. As a systems librarian, you're now going to be responsible to a certain extent for providing the ability to store and how you do that. And that can become very complex. As for activities, I mentioned just 3 that may seem very familiar, but I would suggest will have a new sort of context for you. Backups. Again, as a desktop user, you may or may not, if you do, I commend you, back up your content from your desktop to a flash drive, to an external hard drive. When you become a system administrator, a systems librarian, now it falls on you to make sure that your system content is backed up regularly, is backed up securely, and you will need to become very familiar of how you restore when some crisis situation happens with your system. It will happen, don't worry about that. You just want to be prepared and ready to do it. Updates and patches. We are, and I will admit I'm as bad as anybody, notoriously bad at keeping our desktop systems up to date. Granted, that's because some of the software that we use on them seems to be updating constantly. When you are a system librarian, that becomes more important because updates and patches more often than not have security issues involved, and you don't want to take a chance that your system is insecure. And then hardware assessment. You know, when I was a reference librarian and my machine broke down, I just called somebody and said, hey, my machine broke down, and let somebody else fix it. When you're running big systems, you don't want to get to the point where your system breaks down. You want to anticipate failures and solve failures before they happen. And so one of the things as a systems librarian that you're going to look at is software products and tools that you can use to warn you ahead of time before hard drives go bad or so on and so forth. Just some examples of some activities that will be new to you. Very quickly, because I know I'm running out of time, but this is very important. This may be a role that is very new to you, and that is decision maker. As you step into a systems librarian role, either officially or sort of by default, you may be looked on to make decisions about major technology initiatives and issues. And I list here 4 sort of areas that you will need to think about. Is your system local versus hosted? You may be consulted. You know, your dean or director may come to you and say, hey, should this be local or hosted? You're going to need to know what that means. Very simply, do you run the system hardware where you're at and you maintain all of it? Or is it located someplace else and you're paying somebody else to maintain it? There are reasons to do both. Then you're going to be the one that may be asked, how do we choose, and which is the best value? Build versus buy. Some places like to build their own software and products. Some places like to or have to purchase their products. You may be the person that will come and say, hey, can we develop this in-house? And you will say yes or no based on the resources you have. Or you may say, yeah, we could, but buying it is probably a better idea for a variety of reasons. Proprietary soft products versus open source. I offer this because, A, oftentimes one of your administrators may come and say, hey, why don't we just do an open source thing because it's free? Please, please, please. And mind you, I am a staunch open source advocate. But please, please, please do not let anybody believe open source is free. It's simply an issue of where the costs are involved. Yes, the software itself may be free, but somebody has to maintain it, somebody has to adapt it, somebody has to have a set of skills that can handle open source software. That's where the payment comes, because that's not cheap, either in time or in money. So there are instances where going with a proprietary solution may be preferred. You know, you will know your environment, but you may be the one that's asked to assist with that decision. And then product versus process. I mention this only because this may not be where you are a decision maker, but you can be what I term a nudger. Oftentimes, or in some cases, the effective use of a system is dependent on the work processes that are involved. And in some cases, those processes need to change in order to most effectively use a system. You may not, and certainly aren't going to be the person who's going to go tell the head of cataloging how they should do their jobs. But you might be able to nudge them if it is necessary, and sometimes it isn't. But if it is necessary, you may be the one asked to nudge them to see that if they change their processes in this way, then the product will function more effectively. As I say, being a decision maker, I really enjoy. It's a great part of the job, but it may be a new part of the job. So, as I've hopefully have conveyed along the way, don't get over anxious about any of this. You can do this. First and foremost, somebody asked me right before we started, so, you know, what is everything a systems librarian needs to know? To which I said, I have no idea, because I never know everything that I need to know as a systems librarian or in the role that I have now. And you won't either, so don't worry. And if you're starting out, you definitely won't. Don't worry about it. You'll learn as you go, and hopefully you'll enjoy learning as you go. But a couple of things. Help is available. First thing to recognize is if somebody has asked you to take on this role, if people have encouraged you to take on this role, obviously you must know something, or obviously they perceive that you have the ability to do it. So go with that. You know, sometimes we're our own worst critics with some of these things. And as I mentioned, recognize the rest of us all started basically the same place. We didn't start out as systems librarians. We didn't have a background as systems librarians. We learned as we went. And you'll do the same just fine. Some brief comments on key things. You know, there's all kinds of help out there, but I would encourage you with these 3 items. First and foremost, find your local campus technology expertise and use it. That may or may not be your campus computing center, but I guarantee you there are people on your campus, there may even be people on your library staff that have areas of technology expertise that will be useful to you. Take advantage of it. I'm a firm believer that I have no pride. I will take advantage of anybody who can help me do anything. And when it comes to expertise, I'm a big believer, surround yourself with people smarter than you are. And so take advantage of the expertise that's around you. vendor and product listservs and forums. And I would emphasize here, particularly user group driven listservs and forums are invaluable. I will say categorically that in all my experience, the single most useful information and help resource that I've had throughout my career is the Easy Proxy listserv. Those people are incredibly knowledgeable. They're experiencing the same things that I experience. They answer questions immediately with little occasional sort of ribbing if the question's been asked 1,000 times, but still they answer. Take advantage of that. My staff is incredibly self-reliant, and that's a wonderful thing. But if I ever have one thing that I need to encourage them, it's take advantage of other people already knowing the answers. I always say chances are very good that whatever issue you have, somebody else has already faced it. So while it's admirable for you to try and figure it out on your own, it might be more efficient to just find somebody else and find out what the answer is. Listservs are great for that. And check with colleagues at similar institutions. Again, there are other people in your same position. Take advantage of that. Do not feel you have to do this on your own. Learn from everybody else, and I guarantee you, you will be very successful. That's what I did. And, you know, Murphy's Law. Here I am. So I hope this has given you some things to think about. I hope it's encouraged you. And now, hopefully, we have at least a little time for some questions and anything that I might be able to respond to.
Thank you, Glenn. I came out of that feeling half, oh my gosh, what a lot of stuff, and half, wow, reassuring that a person doesn't have to know everything the first day. Okay, so we have some questions. Do you think it's necessary to take classes toward a certificate or degree in technology, networking, etc.? Or can a person pick up the skills through self-learning or in a free online learning environment like Coursera?
Well, as I say, my experience, and mine is not at all atypical, shows that you can learn everything if that is the way you are, on just picking it up as you go. As I say, I have taken no official computer science classes. I've sat in on some. I take advantage of any opportunity for technology training in a variety of areas, whether it's online, whether it's webinar, Coursera. Here in Columbia, we have an organization called ITology that is a community situation that offers a variety of technology training. I take advantage of that. My staff takes advantage of that. I would say that none of my staff actually have formal technology training. I do have some folks who are now taking some computer science classes, and you mentioned, I think, accredited. I think you used the term accredited. The one thing I will say is some organizations sort of require or like to have what are called certifications, which basically are tests you take to prove that you have certain expertise. And so in some of those cases, you might need to take a more or less formal training session for that. That's totally, those things are valuable, I would say, but I think it's totally dependent on whether your organization sort of expects that or not. So I hope that answered.
Right, thank you. And just a reminder to everyone, if you have a question or a comment, please use the question box with GoToWebinar. Okay, you mentioned that you have a staff. What types of positions, even if they're not full-time positions, what type of positions should be covered in a systems department?
Well, good question. And let me say at the outset that I sort of have changed the title of our unit to Library Technology Services simply because its history was called Systems, and we do so much more than systems. So, having said that, if you have the ability, if your staff is such that you can have multiple positions, you are going to need to have a system administrator, at least. You're probably going to need to have a, we call it technical support, but basically think of it as the person who supports desktop, laptop, end user computers. We have an ILS system administrator separate from our system administrator. Again, there are situations where you're going to do all of that. And more, I think you probably are seeing some position that is web or sort of end user interface kind of thing. I mean, we call it a web manager, but it's going to be somebody who's responsible for the user experience at the end. The reason for that is that's another area where skills and knowledge have grown tremendously in terms of usability and design and all of those kinds of things, and that really can be a whole job in and of itself. So those three primarily, and any variation on that theme.
Okay, great. The poll showed that there were several people who were interested in becoming a systems librarian. Here's a question from one of those. I want to become a systems librarian and have some computer and programming skills, but what skills might most impress someone hiring a systems librarian?
Well, as I say, you mentioned that you have some programming skills. Make sure first and foremost that part of those programming skills is actually at the scripting level. Oftentimes, programming as taught in computer science classes is far beyond what most systems librarians are ever going to do. And being very familiar with Linux, Unix operating system types of environments. You know, can you install one? If you know networking, that becomes very essential. IP addresses and that type of thing. I think the tricky part, and I'm assuming you're already working in a library, in that case, the tricky part may be, do you have opportunities to, and I wish I could come up with a better way to phrase this, but hopefully you'll get the meaning, stick your nose in things that are going on there. Systems librarians oftentimes, as I mentioned, arrive in those positions simply because they develop some knowledge about some things that everybody else didn't. And suddenly it's like, oh, well, they can do it because they know more than everybody else. So, you know, you don't want to step on anybody's toes, but if you have the opportunities, just say, hey, I'm interested. If you've got somebody already doing some of this stuff, can you show me about that? Can you tell me about how that integrated library system works on the back end? You know, what database is it using and that type of thing.
Great. Here's a question from another of the populations. It seems that many accidental systems librarians evolve or are taken on in addition to other duties. So do you have tips on how to juggle the systems duties or technology duties on top of another full-time job?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because I will tell you my opinion, and hopefully your bosses aren't listening. And then I'll try and give you some ideas of how to manage that. First and foremost, they really are two separate jobs, and sooner or later, your bosses have to make a choice of which one they want you to be. because in most cases you're going to become overwhelmed very quickly. I mean, it's inherent in our profession that anybody who's moved from one job to another, regardless whether it's systems librarian, if it's internal, you never really give up the other job. You just sort of take on more responsibilities. But having said that, I think one of the things that perhaps you can do is try to segment and organize your time so that, for example, if your bosses allow you, say, okay, I will, 3 days, 2 days, or I don't like the half-day thing because I don't work very well with that and things happen. So even though I say, well, I'll work half-day on this and half-day on that, it generally doesn't play out. For me, in my experience with, in fact, I have a staff member, my system administrator is sort of in that role where a couple of days he's doing one thing, the other days he's doing another thing. If you can do that, and arrange some kind of schedule and say, these days I'm going to focus on system stuff. These days I'm going to focus on my other job. And continually remind your bosses, sooner or later, you've got to choose which of one of the two you want me to do, because I can't do both of them forever.
Thank you. Well, I'm sorry to say that we're out of time. We have a couple more questions that we'll send to Glenn, and he's agreed to answer those, and we'll send the answers out with the slides and recording. So thank you. Thank you mostly to Glenn. That was really interesting. Appreciate your doing that. Also to the Continuing Education Committee. We have with us Eva Sorrell and Wanda Jazzarieri, who are our tech support people and ensure that webinars go smoothly. Also Julie Reese from the ALCTS office, who coordinates a lot of our work. So we have some upcoming events. So this fall we have additional webinars, 2 of them in our video series, Pricing and Other Issues in Streaming Videos and Video Game Collections, Time Management, and an RDA Serials Cataloging Update. So I hope you'll look at those descriptions online and join us for those. The Continuing Education Committee also has web courses. So those are 4 to 6 week courses, and they get into real details on some of these topics. They're held throughout the year. Also, one e-forum left this fall, Standards for Digital Images. So those are without charge. You just signed up for the listserv, and they're 2-day email discussions. There's a link here on the slide to submit a proposal, and also links to get more details. So we hope to see you in future ALCTS continuing education offerings. Well, that includes our session for today. Thank you for joining us.